It's coming to Muhit.
All right, so here we go. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. I actually got a couple of questions, and let me go first for the questions that came before. And the first question says, Assalamu alaikum. Here in South Africa, after a person dies, to hold a khatm in Al-Quran on behalf of that person. So each person takes a juzu and recites for an hour or two until the entire khatm is read. The intent is for the dead to receive this. Is this allowed? Number one is that when we talk about bid'ah, when anytime we talk about an innovation, there are several things what defines an innovation. Although we all agree that the Prophet ﷺ actually said that that every single innovation is a delusion, and every delusion is in hellfire. So generally, when we talk about innovations, it's very important to understand that it's an innovation that relates to how we practice the faith. And not only that, but is using cars innovation, is using all that? No, because that's not related to the religion, all right? And what about using buying online on Amazon, buying online? Is that an innovation? No, because an innovation is something that is related to bringing in something in ritual, only in ritual, not in other things in our life. It's only in ritual. So is every single ritual that we can bring in necessarily haram or not? Well, not all rituals necessarily don't have something that the Prophet ﷺ had done. Let's give an example. There are two kinds of let me say it this way. When we talk about Salat al-Tarawih, we pretty much pray Jama'ah, right? But the Prophet ﷺ did not always pray Jama'ah. He more prayed it as an individual than Jama'ah in the masjid. It isn't until the Prophet ﷺ felt that the Muslims were going to feel that it's obligatory, faridah, that he decided that no, we're not going to pray at Jama'ah and as frequent. Well, later, after the death of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and even during the time of Umar ibn Khattab, that he saw that people are reviving what the Prophet ﷺ used to do, which is praying it in Jama'ah. So then Umar ibn Khattab revived that Jama'ah. Now that makes it that it's not a bid'ah, an innovation, to pray Salat al-Jama'ah, because it was done by the Prophet ﷺ. Now, can this become a bid'ah hasana? It can be a bid'ah hasana, but a bid'ah hasana means a good innovation. So can we just invent really nice things and actually say, well, this is a good innovation? For anything to be a good innovation, which is what Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam had defined as, for something to be a good innovation, it would have to have been done by the Prophet ﷺ at least once. And then, or it was practiced by the Prophet ﷺ. It's not an innovation per se. It was practiced, but now probably putting it more like more organized, or something where it will help us keep track, etc. That would make it a good innovation, not necessarily an evil innovation. A bad innovation would be an innovation where the Prophet ﷺ had never done it before. Such as people, they're carrying the dead and voicing in the loudest voice, Fatiha, and everybody's like, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and reading it in that way. Those are just some examples. So when it comes to reading Quran on behalf of the dead, is this something that the Prophet ﷺ had at all mentioned. When it comes to any ritual, there's one story where the Prophet ﷺ, a lady said, my mother, she made an oath to do Hajj and she died. Should I do Hajj on her behalf? And the Prophet ﷺ tells her, if your mom had owed something, would you pay that debt? And she said, yes. He said, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's debt is worth. Number two, that the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever has any fast to do and they died, then the person that is their guardian is going to fast on their behalf. In other words, make up the fast. Here's for fasting. Hadith number 3, that the Prophet ﷺ actually said that if the son of Adam, if they die, their deeds would end except in 3 things. 1, continuous knowledge that's being spread after their death. 2, sadaqah jariyah, a donation that people are still benefiting from. And number 3, waladun salihun yad'u lah, a son, an offspring that is making dua on his behalf. Having that being said, scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether, if it's not the child, meaning a person's offspring, doing the dua, can I read on behalf of my neighbor? Can I do on behalf of my neighbor maybe sadaqah jariyah on behalf of my neighbor or behalf of my cousin or my classmate, etc.? Well, that one, scholars had different opinions on because they considered that it's limited to the 3. Other scholars said it's not limited to the 3. Because when we say ilm, knowledge that people are benefiting from, it's not limited to the children. It's not limited to the children. Sadaqah jariyah, I built a masjid, I built a school, I built an orphanage. As long as they're making use of that orphanage that I had built, it's still going to be considered a donation. As long as they're making use of it, I'm going to be rewarded for it. Now, when it comes to reading Quran, is that also included? Again, scholars had different opinions because of the hadith. So can we go from the Hajj, just like the Hajj, the Prophet ﷺ told the woman that she can do Hajj on her behalf of her mother. What if she didn't make an oath? She died, never made Hajj, didn't even have the money to do so, and I decided to make Hajj or fast. Can I do other things? Well, rituals are different kinds. There's a fiscal, monetary ritual, such as zakah, and there's body or physical ritual, such as salah, and there's oral ritual. Scholars had different opinions when we talk about ritual on whether that ritual must be something that involves, for example, money. Hajj, for example, the person went to Hajj, although yes, they used their money, but they also did some kind of a physical activity. All right? And when we talk about fasting, there was also a physical activity involved. So can somebody pray on somebody's behalf? All right? We don't have any evidence about praying on somebody's behalf, but we do have, when it comes to ritual, evidences on fasting on somebody's behalf if they had died, or paying zakah, or even for Hajj. But for when we talk about other rituals, it's really important to understand that ritual, especially ritual, you can't do that analogy and say, well, just like I do for salah, I can do for fasting and do it on behalf of my mother. Why don't I just also do dhikr? Why don't I also do salah, etc.? Ritual, you can't do what is called analogy or qiyas. You can't say, well, just like this is done here, I can compare that to this. Ritual, especially, you have to have a reference to go back to. Now, going back to the story of Quran, scholars had different opinions on whether Quran is also included in those rituals that you can do on behalf of somebody or not? What is the preponderant ruling? Wallahu a'lam, that you can read Quran on behalf of your mother, on behalf of your father, and although Malikis the Maliki madhab totally disagree with this, but you can actually read on their behalf, because generally this is part of a dhikr. Dhikr, there's the dhikr, dua, waladun salihun yad'u la. This is dua. This is part of dhikr. Dhikr, where I'm reading Quran, this is part of dhikr. So, nas'al Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they will be rewarded for it. But what about doing it in a circle, and each one is taking a juz'u and reading? We've got 30 juz'u, we've got 30 women, each one needs to complete a juz'u. Is that something that the Prophet ﷺ did? He didn't. Is it haram to necessarily do that? It's not haram to necessarily do that. They're gathering, each one's reading a juz'u, and she's hoping that maybe she'll benefit from this instead of just sitting, gathering, and just talking. So I'm just taking Quran and reading and hoping that she'll get the reward for this. Like I said, different opinions between scholars, but in general is that when we have different opinions between scholars, I don't like to hurry and call it an innovation, especially that scholars had different opinions on it. All right, take it easy. It's very easy to just paintbrush things and say bid'ah or haram, especially when an issue has differences of opinions between scholars. I'd slow down. All right. Another question: is the coronavirus a sign of the last day? Is the coronavirus? Well, number one is that the Prophet ﷺ did actually mention that some of the signs of Judgment Day is the spread of in the prevalence of diseases or natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, all these different things, and that as a result of these natural disasters, which includes diseases, that it is the sign of Judgment Day, but not specifically coronavirus. I can't say specifically coronavirus. I don't know if this is laboratory made somewhere in the lab, or whether this was some kind of a weapon that was trying to find its way. I'm not sure what it is, but generally, and I don't know if it's an exaggerated, hysterical media thing. I have no idea. But in the end, is that we know that it's part of the signs of Judgment Day to actually have all these different diseases, coronavirus or what's it called, cancer or other. I mean, when we look at 94,000 people were inflicted with coronavirus and only 3,200 people died from it, you start questioning, is it really that dangerous? If 94,000 people were inflicted with that virus and only 3,200 died, that's what, 4%? Is it really that dangerous, or is it a media thing? I don't know. I'm not specialized, but it's just telling me that some butterfly is bringing about some questions here.
And they're saying that people with low immunity are the one who's not.
Well, isn't that the case with things like pneumonia and so many different illnesses? I mean, isn't that even flu? I mean, if somebody had the flu and they already had, they're, I don't know, doing some kind of chemical, chemotherapy, just a flu is enough to kill them sometimes. Right. So whatever. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a specialized person in, epidemics and all these different things, but I'm just saying. Can the tawaf around the Kaaba stop, and for how long? The tawaf around the Kaaba, although I personally feel that the tawaf around the Kaaba was more politically motivated than a fear of coronavirus or any of that. The reason why I say that is in Mecca, or even in Saudi Arabia, there weren't that many people that were inflicted by it, and I think I'm just wondering if it was politically motivated or to use that time. But generally, if, for example, if we take out the political side of it, and they felt that it was posing some danger and putting some danger in it, or might lead to some danger, especially that it's always a place where people are traveling from different parts of the world, and felt that this danger, we need to make sure that we're disinfecting the area. That's not necessarily haram, and because even it is part of Islam that you actually do what is part of qadar, meaning quarantine is actually part of disease and prevention in Islam. When the Prophet ﷺ actually said that if a disease had spread in one area, well, don't go to that area. If you're in it, don't get out. If you're outside, don't go inside. And Umar ibn al-Khattab actually said, "Afirru min qadarillahi ila qadarillah," that I go from what was destined to what was destined. From what was destined. So this is actually part of prevention. So is it necessarily a sign of Judgment Day? No. How many times in history? But one thing to say is that tawaf around the Kaaba, the sign of Judgment Day when it relates to the Kaaba, is that the Kaaba will be totally demolished. Not one stone is going to stay on top of the other by a man that will invade the Kaaba from Ethiopia. And the Prophet ﷺ described him as the Suwayqatayn. He's got really skinny saq, really skinny legs. He's a man from Ethiopia, who probably politician, king, who knows what he is. And he'll be the person to... Yeah, well, no, that's not the name. That's a description.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a description of what he will look like.
Okay.
The Suwayqatayn, the man with the two skinny bones, two skinny legs. All right, that's a description. So the Prophet ﷺ didn't say his name, but said that's what he looks like. All right, and that the Kaaba will be demolished, not one stone over the other. And another part of the signs of Judgment Day, that Medina will be totally abandoned. Nobody will be living in Medina at all. Nobody will be living in Medina. And in fact, the Masjid al-Nabawi will only have wild animals running inside. Only wild animals. There's nobody, no people are going to go there. It's just wild animals running and roaming around. That's it.
But that is going to come after Prophet Isa, right? Because the way they say is like Mahdi prophet.
Well, the chronology, when we talk about signs of Judgment Day, we don't actually know the exact chronology of what comes first and what comes second. Because
you know how they say it's like Mahdi is going to come first. He's going to build an army. Then when he's doing further,
so when it comes to Mahdi and Prophet Isa, yes, that's correlated. But when it comes to the other signs of Judgment Day, we don't necessarily know what comes first. So is it Prophet Isa alayhi salam, or is it Ya'juj Ma'juj? Or is it, so Mahdi, Dajjal, and Prophet Isa alayhi salam, they're actually, in fact, they're going to be, they're going to be in the same era. They're going to be, in fact, they're going to be meeting one another.
Yeah.
All right, that's a different story. But when we talk about Ya'juj Ma'juj, when we talk about Dajjal, when we talk, what is the chronology? What's going to come first and then second and finally third? We don't actually have the exact chronology, but it's more of scholars' interpretations, or sometimes their understanding of the signs of Judgment Day, that this is first, then that, then that, then that. There's a difference between the minor signs of Judgment Day and the major signs of Judgment Day, because the minor signs of Judgment Day, those come before the major signs. All right? But that doesn't mean that the minor signs would end. They will still continue. The minor signs, there are minor signs that happened and ended, just like the Prophet ﷺ. He was there. The Prophet ﷺ said, me, myself, and Judgment Day, we actually came together, the signs of Judgment Day. So the Prophet ﷺ himself is one of the signs of Judgment Day. And in fact, he says, we both came like hat kahatain, and he pointed to his index finger and his middle finger. So if you look at these as graphs, as a graph, so the Prophet ﷺ's graph is the index finger, and the index finger compared to the middle finger. Puts them both together to say, well, this is when we're looking at a graph, this is how close I am to the judgment day, to the end of the world. There are other minor signs of judgment day that happened and will still continue to happen, like the prevalence of zina, or killing, or genocides, etc. The Prophet ﷺ said that was going to be part of a sign of judgment day. And I personally feel that the beginning of the beginning of postmodernism, the lifestyle that we're living in right now, is the start of those, the start of having that philosophy where there's no morality. Because in postmodernism, or in atheism, postmodernism is the sharia of atheism, and according to atheism or postmodernism, that morality is nothing but collective myth. And if we are to say morality is nothing but collective myth, imagine if we are to spread this as an idea in where every single person is going to consider on a universal level and make that a universal maxim, that morality, ethics are nothing but a collective myth, and that you're just inventing things. Imagine every single person believing that and regarding that, if it's a myth, well, that means there's no such thing as morals, because anyways, we're just matter in motion. Never, ever, ever in history did we have any nation, any civilization that regarded that there is no such thing as morality. They always had their own interpretation. Even if we look at Eastern religions, they will still have a foundation where this is how I define right and wrong. Whether you talk about Hindus, you talk about Buddhists, even though Buddhists are generally atheists, but they will still consider Confucius or Buddha and etc. They'll still consider that there's a philosophy, regardless of whether it's right or wrong. But there's a philosophy that you have to strive to become a better person. You have to strive to become a better person. But if the concept of betterness or piety is viewed as a myth, and right now in schools, people are indoctrinated with this type of philosophy, in the long run, it is indeed going to be catastrophic. Because on a global scale, you're talking about individuals, societies seeing morality as just fake, nothing to adhere to. It's just fake. Whether morality in the way we making family, or whether the morality in the way we deal with each other on a financial level, etc., it is extremely scary, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our children. But what I see from the postmodern lifestyle and all that indoctrination is, from what I see it, the beginning of the type of fasad that the Prophet ﷺ was talking about in the hadith. The fasad, or the destruction in people's morality, in people's understanding of life. You could see that the Prophet ﷺ was talking about implications, an implication on what's going to happen, but he didn't necessarily say all the details of what philosophy is going to be spread. But he did mention that people are not going to see akhlaq at all, of any value. He did mention that there's going to be genocides and people, and nobody is going to stop it. Nobody's going to talk about any morality. In fact, zina will be open in the street, and the best of the men, best of them, he's just the best guy out of all these, will just say, you know what, you could have found a wall to just do it behind it. Didn't even say it was wrong. Didn't even dare to. And the mu'mineen, because there's no place where they could keep and upbring their children to be good Muslims, they'll have no safe place to be in but far away in the woods, far away in the caves. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right now, when I look at public schools and when I look, and I used to think it was just in the US, but when I traveled, I discovered that it wasn't just in the US. Right now, this is becoming an indoctrination at a global scale, where it's even in the Muslim countries, and people are right now being indoctrinated with these ideas. If at a global scale, if even the Muslims, little by little, are indoctrinated with these types of ideas, Nas'Allah al-afwa al-afiyah, will it happen where we will not find a safe place to upbring our faith, or elevate our faith, or even elevate our children's faith, but to stay away from the city and go and live in the woods or live in the caves? It is indeed very scary. Do I see it happening? Well, right now, so far, we are able to homeschool our children. We are able to put our children in masajid. We are able to bring in these things. Is it going to be possible where even in the masajid, we're not going to be able to say, قال الله وقال رسوله? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and the Prophet ﷺ said, is it going to happen? Is it possible? If it happened in China and the whole world is quiet about it, or it's happening in other places and nobody is saying anything about it, can it happen here in the US or in even other countries and no one say anything about it? Simply because, well, it's going to be a justified thing, because it's going to be the same exact accusation that China is putting on the Uyghur Muslims, and said that that's what's causing terrorism. A good justification. It seems very smart. Can it happen here too? Can it happen elsewhere? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve our children and preserve our deen. But if we do not act about this, it really is indeed scary, and it really frustrates me so many times to think about it, because whenever you see a philosophy, you don't just look at the philosophy and bear it without looking at the implications 20, 30 years from now, where it's heading. Where is it going? What's going to happen? Is this the end of morality? Is this the death of morality? Is this the death of anything called right and wrong? Ya Allah, Allah understand. Whenever I think about this, I lose my focus, because I cannot fathom what the world will look like. How many times in history has the Kaaba been closed before? There were some times, such as Heyman al-Atibi, when this guy in 1979, he had claimed that he was a prophet, and then wanted to do a revolution in the Kaaba area, and people were in danger, so they did close it down for 15 days, I believe that was. So another time, I can't remember the exact date, but for a couple of hours also it was closed because there was a stampede, and that ran over a number of people during Ramadan, so they had to close it until they get things organized.
There was one more time when somebody claimed as Mahdi.
Well, that was it.
1979.
And that's Jihman al-Atibi. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Here's another question. I have a question that has been troubling me for a long period of time. Please, can you tell me what is the importance of and place of heart in Islam? So we're talking about Qalb, Fouad, and Sadr. I loved that question very, very, very much, because when we look at that question, I must admit, this is one of the rare questions that I got, that I felt that the person was looking deep in the words, and especially when we talk about spirituality. When we look at Sadr, Qalb, and Fouad, bear with me, because this is going to take some mind focus. Let me say it that way. Number one, when we talk about Qalb, Sadr, Qalb, and Fuad, use it, look at it. Sadr is level 1, Qalb is level 2, Fuad is level 3. All right? Compare that with level 1 is Islam, level 2 is Iman, level 3 is Ihsan. All right? Where do we get that from? We get that from the hadith when Jibreel alayhi salam actually came to the Prophet ﷺ and to the Sahaba. They were sitting down and he actually sat right in front of the Prophet ﷺ and said, "Oh Muhammad, tell me about Islam." And he said, Islam is believing in Allah, أن تشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله وتقيم الصلاة وتؤتي الزكاة وتصوم رمضان وتحج البيت إن استطعت إليه سبيلا. Then he says, صدقت. You're right. The Sahaba said, we were surprised. How is it that he's asking him and at the same time affirming and confirming what he said? In other words, is he the teacher or is he a student? So then he said, well, tell me about Iman. And in Iman, he said, Al-Iman is worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not worship, but faith. And tu'mina billahi, believing in Allah, and tu'mina billahi, the angels, malaikatihi, wa kutubihi, the books, wa rusulihi, and the prophets and messengers, wa rusulihi, wal yawm al-akhir, and judgment day, wal qadar khayrihi wa sharrih. Al-qadar, qada'u qadar, the destiny. And then he says, sadaqt, you're right. And then for the final one, he said, so tell me about al-ihsan. And he said, al-ihsan is when you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you could see Allah. Because if you can't see Allah, you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to see you. Now, look at these three things. In the first one, he said, an tashhada, to bear witness. This is related to Sadr. Sadr is what does more grasping, rationality, and observation. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says in Surah Al-Kahf. الذين كانت أعينهم في غطاء عن ذكري. Those that their eyes were covered from dhikr. وكانوا لا يستطيعون سمعا, and they're not able to hear. So question, is dhikr done in eyes or in mouth? So how could you say كانت أعينهم في غطاء عن ذكري, that their eyes were blind from my dhikr? Wait a minute, you do dhikr in your mouth or you do dhikr in your eye?
You can't see the gestures or...
This dhikr that is mentioned in this ayah is related to the Sadr one. Is related to أن تشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. Is related to the Sadr one. أن تشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. It's the first level of Islam. All right, the level of Islam. So what is the level of Islam? Level of Islam, you observe the world, you see everything around you, and you say, I bear witness that there's no God worthy of worship but Allah. And you put that, from that observation, you make it into a behavior. But the behavior does not necessarily mean that it has necessarily reached the Qalb level. What is the Qalb level? The Qalb level is different than the Sadr level, because the Sadr level, it's just an observation, even though they all mean core, but the Sadr is a wider, this is Sadr. But the Qalb is the heart. Al-Fuad is deep in the heart. Now, when the person begins or starts in the first level, then they're doing that. الَّذِينَ كَانَتْ أَعْيُنُهُمْ فِي غِطَاءٍ عَنْ ذِكْرِي. They're doing the first level. They're still in the first level of their Islam, bearing witness, a rationality. My mind has come to understand. The Qalb, on the other hand, is another level. Because the Qalb, أَن تُؤْمِنَ بِاللَّهِ, to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is another level. What level is that? it's a deeper level than just becoming observant about it and rational about it. Right now, no, it has gone deeper than that to the point that it's affecting your heart. But in order for it to affect your heart, that needs a stronger observation, where you're observing things to the point that it has strongly went in your heart that now your body would get goosebumps from that deep iman, from that deep faith. It started seeing the unseen. What is seeing the unseen? We talked about it yesterday. It started seeing the unseen. What is the unseen? Because the second level is أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر. تؤمن بالله وملائكته is that, and تؤمن, it's a faith. It's not a naked eye observation. It's another level. And this is the level that relates to al-qalb. Al-qalb is now feeling it a deep sensation to the point that it's affecting. So when we talk about قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ, that they're actually in deep khushu'. What is khushu'? Talked about al-mu'minun. This is the level of iman. This level of iman, that's why when they pray, they don't pray like the people in the level of Islam. In the level of Islam, Allahu Akbar, and they're praying. But in the level of Iman, no. They don't just observe Salah. No, they live deep in Salah to the point that they are so in such deep sensation that they're in the level of khushu'. They're a different level. When they read, when they do dhikr, they don't just do dhikr off tongue. No. Their dhikr affects even their tears. Their dhikr affects their goosebumps. Their dhikr is affecting every single thing because it has gone beyond from the first level of shahada. I understand, I believe, an observation, rationality, to another type where I strongly, deeply believe that it's affecting my heart and even affecting, I'm now seeing what normally people do not see. For a level of Iman, it's a different side. Level of Iman, it affects the Qalb. The third level, which is the level of al-Fuad. A level of Fuad, that is different because that's the level of al-Ihsan. The level of Ihsan, when the person worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they could see Allah, that's even higher than the level of Iman. Because this person, even if they were to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would not add them any level of Iman, because they have gone so deep in their level of Iman that it had reached their fu'ad, the core of their heart. It had reached the core of their heart way deep inside. Now, Sadr, al-Qalb, al-Fu'ad. Sadr, so this is just the surface of heart. Surface of the heart. Al-Qalb, it's going deeper inside. It was absorbed by the heart. Al-Fu'ad, it was so deeply absorbed that it reached the core of the core of the heart's core. Sadr, also when it comes to action and activity, the person in the level of Islam, they're still trying to get into practicing Sharia, practicing Islam. It was still there. But in the level of al-Qalb, they went beyond a practice to the point of taqwa. They're not waiting and looking at the limits, but they went farther, that they actually had taqwa, that even if something is halal, I'm not going to do it because I don't want it to affect my deen. They'll abstain. They're not just looking for halal haram boundaries. They'll, even those issues that might be gray areas, like, I'll abstain. That's the qalb level. When it comes to action, for a mu'min, for somebody with a fu'ad, no, they have gone farther than just a practice, to the point that they could actually see halal and haram. Halal, they will love it, but they will see al-ibadah as nothing but beauty. They will see in ibadah itself, in obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will see it as their Jannah. They're just enjoying it. They're enjoying living in ibadah. And they would hate any type of living outside of Islam. And they don't even have any feelings for it. In the level of Iman, there can be some magnet, gravity, that might be pulling them towards haram, but they'll do that in a struggle and still manage to stay. That's the level of Iman versus the level of ihsan. For the level of ihsan, they don't even think twice.